At the edge of the world, there's a city barely holding itself together. Behind it, nothing but wilderness, ruins, and things that should have stayed buried. For the past year, my players, their mercenary company, the Iron Price, has been trying to survive there. This is how it went, and what Pulp Hummock Press's Gods of the Forbidden North can actually deliver. One of the things that makes Gods of the Forbidden North feel different from modern adventures in their design is that the module never hands you certainty. At no point was Morkaal's tomb presented to my game table as go here, clear dungeon, receive reward. Instead, the Iron Price had to discover its location, which required them to interact with the world to find it. They started the campaign with the Eye of Jakara. They knew it unlocked something. But where is the tomb? Through a dream vision of mist-covered cliffs, a drunken sailor's ranting about ghosts, and ancient historical records about a forbidden cult wiped from history, they were able to locate the tomb's hex. 3 completely different leads, 3 unrelated methods of investigation, all pointing to the same place. As frustrated as my players were with having to actually dig for its location, Morkaal's tomb felt ancient, dangerous, and forbidden. It felt real. So, this session actually began somewhere completely unrelated. The House of the Snow Poppies, a location in Vulcangard that deals in, unsavory elements in Vulcangard, involving concubines and potential slavery. That's important because this is how sandbox campaigns work. Players chase rumors, they have obligations, there's side plots, there's dead ends and conflicting priorities. Some characters wanted to continue pursuing Lady Thora and her missing son that they were introduced to in the initial adventure. Others thought the whole thing was suicidal and wanted to walk away entirely as not being lucrative enough. This would be the first time the Iron Price came into contact with the agents of the Nullcule Syndicate, which would then sow the seeds for later conflict. But I digress. The important thing here is the indecision felt healthy, and it is healthy. This is where old school campaigns breathe, in those moments where the party genuinely debates whether adventure is worth the risk, and because the world doesn't scale to your level. Nothing is balanced. Nothing is certain. You have to make a decision based on what you know. And sometimes it's a gut decision. And frankly, you can end up walking into your own grave, right? So with the decision to let Thora and her son go, they started to focus on looking for the tomb. And so the question was what to do next. One of my favorite parts of this session the design is sort of echoed in later dungeons and adventure locations, is that finding the dungeon was an adventure in and of itself. There was no combat, no special set pieces or story beats. There was research. Hjalmar, the Viking magic user, sought supernatural guidance through dream magic, rules provided by RPG Pundit's Old School Companion 3. I will be covering that in a video eventually. I really like it. But he received images of cliffs, sea mists, and a cave opening. I utilized the dream mechanics to create an atmosphere and set the tone of their first foray into the Forbidden North. It also narrowed down their search, the shores of Titherian, somewhere along the shoreline. Looking at the map of Titherian, they were actually able to narrow it down to a few hexes because of the cliff description. Another character, Redon, the Enuruk thief, had found a lead. He found a sailor named Toothless Leonard, ranting and raving about giant ghosts near sea caves. This is actually in the book, and one of the ways PCs can learn the location of the tomb. This little bit of information, like the dream magic I improvised, helped set the tone and added a bit of world building as well. It's classic sword and sorcery energy. World populated by weird drunks, liars, smugglers, thieves, and half-mad survivors, all talking about rumored dangerous ancient sites, right? And then finally, they found, and I hope I pronounced this right, Heng Siyu. She is a magic user and sage at some place called the Aerophagus. It's a magic users got a guild that Hjalmar would later join. But they used her services to do some magic research. And I'm going to digress here a little bit. I think many GMs and players, essentially the gaming tables out there, forget how important sages are. I think they're horribly underutilized, and I'm trying to make a point of including them more. They can help populate your world and provide you, the GM, with some world building, an NPC, a new thing that's out there in the world. Number two, for some hard-earned coin, PCs can learn something without the risk of a failed roll or the threat of a dungeon crawl. They just spend the money and they get this information, an even exchange, which can also help you, the game master, move the adventure forward. And number three, you, the game master, can get away with a little bit of lore dumping without cramming it down your players' throats with a novella-sized campaign handout. Sages, I think, are just invaluable and people should use them more. And I'm really glad Gods of the Forbidden North included her, Heng Siyu. She will become significant later on in this campaign. So what did the Iron Price learn? Well, they learned more about the Enaruk and their history. They learned about the Ilnilgaon, a savage tribe of Enaruk who worship dark entities. They learned about demon worship and the creation of demonic giants and Morkaal's connection to them. Ancient purges, sealed tombs, and deadly traps. And Morkaal's name kept resurfacing in the research, and from this they knew Morkaal meant business. They didn't know exactly what he is or was, but this is exactly how you build mythic weight around a dungeon. They were not only given enough information to locate the hex the dungeon was located in, but also prepare for what they might encounter. By the time the Iron Price left town, the tomb already had centuries of implied history behind it. So the players opted for sea travel to the hex, knowing it was on a cliff. They were concerned that overland travel would be too difficult and dangerous. Their reasoning was the ship will be quicker, and more importantly, they gamed the odds of having an encounter at sea versus an encounter in an overland hex. This is where old school gaming becomes beautiful. It's that cost-benefit analysis. It's what I love. I did have some fun with the reaction tables and the fact that my players are newbies to old school play, but veteran RPGers. I took advantage of their naivete as if they were fresh fish stepping off a boat as immigrants to a new land. They wildly overpaid Captain Dumas, an NPC I created, for transport. He bilked them for 500 gold pieces, knowing that they were seeking treasure. Just as a quick aside, later on, they would hire Captain Dumas as a member of the Iron Price, more like a independent contractor, really. But Dumas is going to be around for a while. Anyway, the Iron Price also hired a few mercenaries and a few porters to carry loot. I was very proud of my players for this decision. Like I said, they've been playing RPGs for a very long time, but they've been like that more storyline, adventure path style where they're the heroes out to stop the world from collapsing or something. A more open world OSR game is just not something they have a lot of experience with. So I was very proud of them for realizing that they knew I was going to be monitoring encumbrance like a hawk, and that they were going to need some extra bodies to do the heavy lifting. Sadly, all the hirelings would end up dying on their excursion. One of them actually failed a morale check and ran. I later solo played him to see if he made it back to Valkengard. He didn't. He was eaten by a group of grackles, which are these bipedal cat creatures native to the Forbidden North. But this would be the beginning of Iron Price's bloody reputation as a hard-nosed mercenary company that rewards greatly for high-risk adventures. They have a huge body count. But I'm glad this happened in their first foray, because they learned that in this campaign, retainers panic, people flee, expeditions collapse, and not everyone gets a heroic ending. Sometimes a guy just disappears into a haunted tomb and nobody ever finds out what happened to him. And that's memorable. One of the things I really like about Morkaal's tomb is the entrance itself. I'm starting to think not enough dungeon designers give the entrance enough consideration. A dungeon is more than just a hole in the ground. For some adventures, maybe that works, but I think we can all agree that the entrance is the player's first impression of the dungeon. It's as important to the setting as the rumors that brought them to the dungeon in the first place. For Morkaal's tomb and the path the PCs chose to take, the entrance isn't just a doorway. It's this eerie cliffside surrounded by mists and crashing waves. They heard stories about ghostly figures manifesting in the fog around the cliffs. And when they finally arrived, they found the whole place felt ancient and hostile before they even stepped inside. And even reaching the entrance was dangerous. You couldn't just simply walk in. The party either had to rappel from the cliffs above or climb from the sea below. The ocean itself was treacherous and violent surf smashing against the rocks. The Iron Price used longboats to get to the cliffs. This is where the first few hired men lost their lives, never to see the inside of the tomb. The dungeon claimed its first victims before they even entered the door. Getting inside, the PCs see a gigantic pale stone statue radiating ancient power, Morkaal. And immediately there's a puzzle, an amulet-shaped indentation at the base of the statue, a mechanism, and a sealed door. This statue can come to life if the PCs don't do what they're supposed to do. Luckily for the Iron Price, it didn't happen. But there was no exposition dump, no NPC explaining the answer. The players had to physically experiment with the environment. And that's that tactile interaction, which is one of the defining strengths of old school dungeon design. You aren't going to get that experience by looking at your character sheet and rolling your, quote, I discern how to figure this out with a +4, end quote, roll. You, the player, have to experiment with the dungeon, and that's immersion. I want to avoid too many spoilers, so I will briefly point out that the dungeon does something I would like to see more dungeons doing, telling their story. Inside the tomb, the walls constantly depict a white-robed figure, a giant one, a black mask, and a floating green cube. This is the sort of thing that helps with world building and mystery. The dungeon doesn't explain itself directly, instead it's creating recurring symbols. Over time, players begin assembling meaning. Who is Morkaal? Why the mask? What is the cube? Was this religion, sorcery, or something worse? Morkaal's tomb felt archaeological. The Iron Price began uncovering fragments of a dead civilization, all of these clues connecting to the history of Tetherian as outlined in the opening chapters of Gods of the Forbidden North. It's why those opening chapters are kind of important. So you, the game master, understand the significance of all this. The thing I loved about this tomb, too, is the treasure never felt safe. Every reward was earned. There's an ice chamber, a room filled with bodies frozen in the walls, which was very unsettling and clearly demonstrated that nobody died peacefully here. There's a boulder trap inspired by Raiders of the Lost Ark. As a result of this trap, they lost another mercenary and a few laborers. And this is around the time the expedition started collapsing. My players immediately started becoming more cautious because they learned that consequences are an actual thing in an RPG. And I think if you enforce consequences, your players will naturally change their behavior. You don't need to lecture them. The deeper the Iron Price went, the more the tomb became a war of attrition. Wraiths emerged from columns. Hirelings started failing morale, and the resources were dwindling. This is something modern dungeon design often forgets. Fear matters more when retreat is possible. Because retreat is always on the table, the Iron Price could have left at any moment. And this tension creates meaningful courage. I will refer you to my video on how meaningful death can ruin your RPG. There'll be a link. Again, without spoiling too much, one of the unique monsters introduced in Gods of the Forbidden North appears in Morkaal's tomb, the Wane Wraiths. These creatures are fantastic. I love them. They're a perfect example of a first-level undead encounter that isn't just another group of zombies or skeletons. And to be clear, I have nothing against zombies and skeletons as classic fantasy monsters. But too often they're treated like disposable cannon fodder, just low-level enemies for the players to mow through. Undead should feel wrong, not like facing an orc or a goblin. I will refer you to my Make Undead Great Again video, which I'm probably going to expand upon. Undead should feel unnatural, frightening, like something that violates the normal laws of life and death. The Wane Wraiths capture that feeling perfectly. They don't feel like generic monsters waiting in a room for combat to begin. They feel like manifestations of the tomb itself, ancient, hateful things lingering in the darkness around Morkaal's resting place. And they have level drain, albeit a toned down first level version of it. They were dangerous, and my players got very lucky. They made their saving throws. I've said often, and I will continue to say it, the story of the Iron Price is one of grit, blood, and a lot of luck. One of the highlights of the dungeon is this anagram puzzle. I'm not going to say too much about it because it really got my players around the table thinking it through and trying to solve it, which is exactly what you want with a puzzle. But they came across sarcophagi, and these were clues to unlock a door in the final area of the dungeon. And this is exactly the kind of puzzle I love. It's built into the environment. The only way you're going to solve it is by being observant. And it's not going to be dependent upon some role. And the dungeon rewarded players for paying attention. But more importantly, the puzzle was designed in such a way that it wasn't a bottleneck. If the players didn't find all the sarcophagi, they could still figure out the puzzle. They needed to have a good majority of the sarcophagi found, but they were able to solve the puzzle. So the final chamber is awesome. The tomb of Morkaal. It's a massive sarcophagi with a 15-foot humanoid corpse in it and a hidden compartment. And inside they found a black book, a black mask, enormous wealth, and a symbol nobody could decipher. This is important because Morkaal's final resting place doesn't fully explain Morkaal at all. It leaves the mystery intact. That ambiguity makes the world feel larger than the players. The Black Book of Morkaal has become a campaign driving plot point as well. There are factions that want it desperately, but that's for another video. So, some closing thoughts. I think this dungeon worked because Morkaal's Tomb it's just a great first level dungeon, but I don't think it's for newbies. I think if you're going to run this, hopefully one of your players is a veteran OSR player. It's to kind of help guide the players a little bit, because one false step or failure to pay attention is going to lead to a TPK. My players are veterans of RPGs, and they know my playstyle, but they're kind of weak in the OSR skill set. They knew enough to avoid trouble, and like I said, with a few lucky rolls, made it out without losing a single PC. But they lost every single mercenary and all their porters. This dungeon was great because it had history, symbol, consequences, mystery, and real danger. And because of that, the expedition felt earned, not consumed, but experienced. Morkaal's Tomb didn't feel like content. It felt like discovering something ancient, hostile, and forgotten beneath the world. And honestly, that's exactly what old school fantasy should feel like. More importantly, it acted as a doorway into hidden dangers lurking in gods of the Forbidden North. With the mystery surrounding Morkaal's Tomb and the actions of the Iron Price, the first dungeon delve helped shape the themes of this campaign organically. This is not about a group of heroes trying to vanquish evil. It is about a mercenary company in an unforgiving and mysterious land that is learning to survive, and that they've learned that the Iron Price must be as hard and unforgiving as the land itself. In the next video, the Iron Price, flush with cash, starts making a name for itself with its first job helping a merchant take goods across the wilds of Titherian, where we discover another settlement, Skullberg. Hope to see you there. Take care, everyone.